So I would now like to welcome Professor Sheila Degotardi. Yes, great. Sheila is a professor of early childhood education at the Macquarie School of Education at Macquarie University, where she teaches and researches in the area of infant toddler pedagogy and curriculum. So Sheila specialises in how relationships and interpersonal interactions shape very young children and their learning and development. She has published over 50 academic articles, chapters, and books on this topic, and her work is informing early childhood education practice and policy in Australia and overseas. So her recent work examines the quality of the language interactions experienced by infants and toddlers in early childhood settings. So Sheila, thank you so much for taking time on Saturday to come and talk to us. We're thrilled to have you here. Welcome, Sheila.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here. Now just give me a moment and I will share my screen. Here we go. Hold on, just give me 1 minute. There we go. Hopefully that is sharing my screen for you. So thank you so much for having me here today. It's a great delight to be talking to you today. And I'm going to be going through and talking to you about infant toddler learning. And I think, having listened to Anthony just then, I think what I have to say certainly resonates with his idea about we need to focus on the learning. Now, with infants and toddlers, that presents us with some challenges. And so I'm going to go through some of those challenges today and hopefully give you some ways in which you can look at the children that you're working with and really embody and embrace the learning that is taking place with our very, very youngest children. So, but before I start, I just want to acknowledge that the land that I'm sitting on today, as you can see, I'm actually at home today, and I'm at home. I live in the Darug Nation, and that is northwest of Sydney. And I live in the Hawkesbury area on the beautiful Hawkesbury or Dirubban River, and it's a very beautiful and rich land. And so I want to acknowledge that land, and I want to acknowledge the Aboriginal custodians of that land. So here are some little beings. Here are some little human beings. Those people, I guess, are very familiar to you. When I talk about working with infants and toddlers, quite often with people who work in centre-based services, sometimes I get the response, oh, well, I don't really need to worry about that because I don't work with children under the age of 2. Well, I suspect that most of you who are listening to this today do work with children under the age of 2. These are your people, and you know them well, and you work with them every day, and you have particular ideas and beliefs about those people. But I'm going to start off with a challenge. I want you to take yourself out of your family daycare knowledge and beliefs about infants for one moment and consider this instead. If you were an alien, never come to planet Earth before, and you end up on planet Earth and you saw these little beings, met these creatures, what would you think? I'm going to just give you a moment to ponder on that. What would you think? You've never met these people before. You don't even know they're people. What immediately would come to mind? Now, why do I ask you to do that? I ask you to do that because the way in which we look at very young children, babies or infants, the way in which we look at them is filtered by the beliefs that we have about them. And I think in our community, this is the first challenge that we have to overcome when we think about infants and toddler learning, because quite often we don't necessarily see infants as learners. So what are some kind of things that we do hear about when people see an image like that? To start off with, are they simply cute? Are infants just cute beings? We hear that, we see it all the time. The advertising industry that works on advertising to parents with babies use this very much. Are infants simply cute? Here's another image. Are they vulnerable? Do they constantly need our protection? Do we need to bubble wrap them? Do we need to keep them safe constantly? This is something for us to think about. And listening to Anthony just then, when he was talking about his friend Mel, who works with toddlers, and she was saying that she wants people to see toddlers beyond simply toilet training and tantruming. We also need to think about infants or babies as more than just simply eating, sleeping, and defecating machines. Because are they simply that? Now, if we think about infants only in these ways, what are we focusing on? We're not focusing on their learning. We're focusing on what they can't do. We're focusing on the deficits. We're also focusing simply on them as physical beings. And I would say that the alien from outer space would probably describe those creatures on that first slide as physical beings, because they don't know that those infants and toddlers have a mind. They don't know that those infants and toddlers are really capable and confident learners from birth. What we need to do is change the lenses that we look at infants and toddlers through, so that we start to understand those capabilities, because once we understand those capabilities, we see them, we're able to reflect on them, and then we're able to support their learning in a much more active and intentional way. So, are infants and toddlers simply waiting to learn, or are they learning from birth? I would argue the latter. They're not waiting to learn. The learning doesn't all happen when children reach that magic preschool age, when children reach that age of 3 or beyond. Children are learning from birth. From birth, as this quote says, young children are capable and they are eager to learn. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is give you some things to look for with the infants and the young toddlers in your family daycare homes. Give you some things, give you some learning dispositions, some thinking dispositions, and some interacting dispositions to look for, because once you can see them, then you can provide for them. So the first thing that I want to stress to you is that infant toddler learning is different from the kind of learning that we see with preschool age children. It's very what we call experiential. It is very much tied to the moment and tied to what that infant sees, feels, hears, and experiences in the here and now. And here are some particular capabilities that infants have and bring right from birth. We see these capabilities. We know now that infants can perceive from birth. They can see, they can hear, they can feel. They use their perception to find out about the world. And they also recognize things even from birth. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but infants are born reacting differently to the voices of people that they have directly experienced in the womb. And let's face it, that's usually the mother, but also if the father has talked around the mother a lot in the womb, infants respond at birth differently to that voice than they do to another person's voice. They already know that the person who owns that voice is significant to them. Infants respond differently from birth to faces as opposed to other shapes and other forms. So they are born into this world with this ability to perceive and to recognize. They're also born intrinsically with motivation. They want to, they have goals and they want to strive to meet those goals. And linked to that is intention, that intentionality in that they have something in mind and they purposefully strive to meet their goal or to achieve what they're setting out to achieve. Curiosity is something else to watch for. Watch the infants and toddlers in your groups and see what are they curious about. I have now a 16-month-old grandchild, and I love watching her. And even when she was very tiny, certain things would capture her attention, and she would watch and deeply engage with those events or those objects. We are born as curious beings, and curiosity is the foundation of wanting to find out more. If we're not curious and we don't have motivation, then we won't be effective learners. So these are some of the absolute fundamental elements that we need to think about. Because remembering, we're not focusing, as Anthony said this morning, we're not focusing simply on what these very young children are doing or what they are, or focusing on their behavior. We need to get beyond that. We need to go deeper. We need to dig below the surface, and we need to focus on the learning. So start off by thinking about learning as being experiential and thinking about some of these early fundamental learning dispositions that we have. Now, why is this important? Why do we need to focus on infants and toddlers? Why do we need to worry about their learning? Surely that can wait. Well, this graph here demonstrates quite clearly, no, we cannot wait. This graph, if you have a look at it, this is essentially the return on investment that you get if you invest time and effort and money on children at different ages to ensure that those children have environments that are optimal for their learning and development. Now you can see here that the best investment that we can do as a community is investing in children of that birth to 3 age or pre-birth to 3 age group. It doesn't mean to say don't invest in older children, but the investment that we have when those children are that age is going to reap benefits, because those early fundamental learning skills provide the foundation for the later learning to come. As Heckman said, and it was Heckman who did the calculations for this very famous graph, skill begets skill. In other words, the skills that they have in infancy then forms the foundation for the later skills and the later capabilities and learning, and so on and so forth. So what kind of experiences then? If I've said that learning is very different in infants and toddlers than it is with older children, what kind of experiences do we need to focus on as learning experiences? To start off with, let's think about what an infant toddler curriculum is, and we're going to do it by thinking about what it is not. As you would know, an infant toddler curriculum is not simply babysitting. Babies do not need to simply be watched and kept clean and safe. They need interesting, stimulating experiences that encourage them to use the skills that they're developing very, very quickly. What else is an infant toddler curriculum not? It is not preschool. Infants and toddlers, as I've said, learn in unique ways. And if we just simply give them watered down preschool experiences, we're not doing justice to those unique ways of learning. So we need to give them experiences that tap into those unique learning styles. So what kind of experiences will we focus on? As you would know from the early years learning framework, curriculum embodies everything that happens during the day in your family daycare setting. So we do certainly need to think about play, and I'm going to go into infant play in a little bit more depth in a moment. We also need to think about the interactions that we have with infants and toddlers. Those interactions, those conversations, those face-to-face, close, emotionally driven interactions that we have with very young children are the site for learning. And so I'm going to go into that a little bit as well. Let's not forget about routines. Children learn during lunchtime. They learn during when they're having their nappy change, and they learn when they're being soothed to sleep. There are particular learning affordances for those routines that we need to capture. And when you're thinking about how you might document, I would challenge you, document what is going on with your children during lunchtime. Watch them closely and think about the learning that is taking place as those children are sitting and eating their lunch with you. Also, let's not forget about the fact that quite often in any early childhood setting, things simply happen. All of a sudden, the storm comes by. All of a sudden, somebody knocks on the door. Suddenly, the milk gets spilt. They're happenings. You didn't plan for them. They simply happened. We can learn through those, and very young children do learn through those happenings. That example that Anthony gave us about the child who comforted the other child this morning was a perfect example of a happening that was captured in that documentation as a really valuable offering in terms of the capabilities of those children. And also we need to realize as well that infants and toddlers don't need to be kept busy all the time. Infants and toddlers learn a huge amount by watching and just simply being. Toddlers are referred to as toddlers for a reason. They tend to toddle an awful lot. Infants tend to lie or crawl and watch a lot. Simply being is fine, and we need to honor that in our programs. So let's go back to thinking about children as capable and competent. We know that infants and toddlers at every stage of their life have particular capabilities. Their motor capabilities develop very, very rapidly during this time. Their perceptual and their cognitive abilities also develop. As I've said, children come into this world already with cognitive dispositions that enable them to learn. Socially as well, we often think about infants and toddlers as being egocentric or not social. Solitary players is something I often hear people say. Infants and toddlers are solitary players. No, they're not. Infants and toddlers are social from birth. They always are striving for connections with other children and with adults. All you have to do is watch and observe carefully and you'll see it. And communication as well. Even before they learn to talk, infants and toddlers are communicating with us and very competently communicating with us. First communications, as you'd know, start with their cries. But very quickly that communication becomes intentional. They will make noises to get your attention. They will start to use gestures and facial expressions to communicate what they want to share with you, how they're feeling as well. All of these skills, all of these capabilities develop so quickly during the first 2 years. In fact, more quickly than they will ever develop in the child's life ever again. So what I'm going to challenge you to do is, when you are watching the infant, to get beyond just simply watching the child's behavior. Think about what you're seeing from the infant's perspective. Put yourselves not in the shoes of the infant, in the mind of the infant. And ask these questions. What can I do? Not what can't I do? What can I do? Right here and now, what can I do? What skills can I use? And also, what do I want to find out about right now, at this time in my life? What am I curious about? What is important to me? What am I interested in? And how do I connect with others around me? So my first challenge to you is, when you are working with the children over the next couple of weeks, take some notes about that. Document your thoughts about that from the child's perspective. So let's go through particular things that you can think about when you're thinking about infant toddler learning. To start off with, as I've said, infants and toddlers spend a lot of time learning to move, but also learning by moving. So we know when children are very young and they're lying on their backs, they're learning, they're gradually building up their strength, they're learning to coordinate their muscles and their limbs, they're learning about themselves, their positioning in space. And they're learning to do amazing things that I have to say, most of us can't do as adults. I'm sorry, but I can no longer stick my big toe in my mouth. I think infants are pretty amazing at the fact that they can do that. They're learning to move, but they're learning by moving, because they're learning about themselves. Once they start crawling, the world opens up, as you know. They start to perceive new sensations. They're also becoming then increasingly intentional, because they can see something over the other side of the room and they can purposefully move towards that item and explore that item. And walking again presents new opportunities for them to learn about the world and learn about themselves and explore their world. Also, we know once they're up and walking, they love to move in various ways. They love to be able to get on things and scoot things and push things, be able to get on and off things and climb over and climb under things. Every step of those developments that I've just described there presents them with new learning opportunities, new ways of being able to explore their world. And so what is really important is that we don't constrain that movement. We don't think that infants and toddlers have to be kept safe and therefore have to be constrained in high chairs or in baby seats that actually stops them being able to use their body. I would challenge you to try and minimize the use of these kind of things that stops them being able to move, but also stops them being able to then learn by moving. So one of the things that I like to say is, try not to put infants and toddlers into positions or situations where they're reliant on you as an adult to help them, or where they cannot get in and out of that position themselves. Now, I'm not saying don't use high chairs or don't use baby chairs. They can be really, really useful and valuable at times, but give infants and toddlers the ability to experience their body and move and become confident in their body as much as you possibly can. Because every new way in which children learn to move heralds new opportunities for their learning. This slide here about moving and carrying, you would know how toddlers in particular love to move things and love to carry things. So provide opportunities for that. Provide them with rich opportunities to move, to shift things, to pick up things, to put things down. All of this is not only giving them confidence in their own body and building up those essential movement skills, but it's also giving them fantastic problem solving experiences, fantastic creating experiences as well. So all of these things are very important. So moving is critically linked to thinking. Moving for the child presents them with opportunities to think and use a whole lot of thinking dispositions. And I've listed some on this slide. When infants and toddlers move, they move with intention, with a purpose. We also see persistence. We want to generate, we want to support persistence in infants and toddlers. We see resilience, the ability to bounce back when things get tricky. Moving as well also gives infants and toddlers opportunities for trial and error. Something doesn't work. Well, give it another go. We also then, if you give it another go, but try it a different way, adapt. And that's all linked to flexible thinking, which is a really fundamental and critical problem-solving skill with infants and toddlers. So I'm going to pause my voice for a minute. I'm going to let you watch this video, and I want you to watch it with those thinking dispositions in mind and make a few notes or share in the chat some of those thinking dispositions that you see of this child as she plays on the surface level, quite simply, with this ball. Hopefully the sound will work, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. You can get what you need to get by just simply watching the video. Oops, sorry, start again. Oh, something stopped. Here we go. Okay, so if you were to watch that, if you were in your home watching that, if you were to document that, what thinking dispositions would you focus on? Would you focus on that child's intention and how she was very much pursuing a goal in mind? Would you focus on her persistence and her resilience? What did you see about that? Would you focus on her adaptation and her flexible thinking? It's all there in that video. All of those capabilities and all of those thinking dispositions are there simply through play with a ball. So one other aspect that I want to cover today is the importance of learning through exploration. As I've said, infants and toddlers very much learn in the here and now. It's experiential learning. And we often hear the term sensory motor learning, and that comes from Piaget some time back. And he captured how, in particular, younger infants and toddlers learn. They learn sensory, as in through their senses, motor through their movement, and it joins together. And there's this lovely quote here that I'd like to share with you that really does sum up how we need to be seeing this early exploratory play that infants and toddlers engage in. Like small scientists, they investigate objects and gather information about what objects are like and what they do when they're acted upon. Their play often looks like small experiments driven by the question, what can I make this do? I apologize for the typo on the slide that I've just noticed. But what can I make this do? And so through exploratory play, children are making discoveries about the world. They're building up knowledge about the world, as in, what is this? What is this thing that I'm seeing and I'm experiencing? And it's not only play with objects. This starts with play with their own body, that hand and that foot play that we see even very young infants and toddlers engaging with, when they start to move their hands and they suddenly notice their hand. I still remember my own daughter many, many years back now at about the age of 4 or 5 months, where she suddenly became fixated with her hand, and she would lie on her back and watch her hand and move it. And then it would go into her mouth, and then she would move it again. And what was really fascinating was then a couple of weeks later, she suddenly realized she had 2 of them, and then spent a lot of time just simply exploring her hands. She was finding out about herself. So hand and foot play is really important. And then recognizing the importance of senses with infants and toddlers, the mouthing, the touching, and the feeling. We often go, oh my goodness, everything goes into their mouth. The reason it does that is because the mouth for very young babies is the most sensitive sensory organ that they have. They get a lot of information by mouthing things. So it's a really important learning process. And then when we move on to object play, it really heralds that awareness of the outside world, when the children strive towards finding an object, feeling an object, finding out what it can do. And so it's a kind of both an inside out and an outside in process. When the child sees an object from the inside out, is I can see something that's really interesting. I'm curious about that. I want to find out about that. So I'm going to try and grab it, and I'll bang it, and I'll move it, and I'll put it in my mouth, and I'll manipulate it. But it's also an outside-in process that supports their understanding of concepts, supports knowledge building. In other words, the child is trying to figure out, what is this? What does it do? And what can I do with this object? All of these things repeated over time builds their knowledge about the world. And that knowledge is fundamental for aspects like mathematics, for physics, for science, all of those different aspects of the world that we value when children enter into their preschool world starts off with this exploratory object play. As Heckman said, skill begets skill, learning begets learning. So a type of object play that you can very easily provide in your family daycare setting is heuristic play. And heuristic play is a fancy word for a type of exploratory play where we give children the opportunities to learn and develop new understandings and to discover and experiment and problem solve through trial and error. And it really does tap into that natural curiosity and that natural sensory motor learning. And what heuristic play is the provision of things. Doesn't have to be toys, things for infants and toddlers to play with. And all of you, I'm sure, will smile when you know what happens when children get their first Christmas present. Do they play with the toy? No. They play with the box. They play with the wrapping paper. They go into your bag and find your keys and play with your keys. Infants and toddlers don't need fancy toys to learn. There are numerous things just in everyday environments that they can engage with and they can learn. And that's what heuristic play taps into, using everyday items and allowing children to play and explore them in the way that they want to do it, to encourage their curiosity and their discovery about those items. So here are some examples of heuristic play. You can present items in a basket like the one on the left-hand side here. This is just offcuts of wood and allowing the child to play. You can have recycled material and present them in a corner of the room to allow children to play with those items without any particular outcome in mind. Just watch them, see what they do with them, and think about those learning dispositions. As I said, kitchen items, measuring cups, measuring bowls, things like this. As we know, they love to get into the tins cupboard and the what we used to call the Tupperware cupboard, the plastics cupboard, and play with those items, because there are numerous things that they can do, and there are no boundaries in terms of what they're able to do. They're able to tap into their natural curiosity to use their learning skills. So here are some of the learning dispositions that children can, that we can foster through heuristic and exploratory play. Curiosity, I've already talked about. Observation, sensation. What does it feel like? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? Discovery, and then mastery, motivation. In other words, I've got something in mind that I want to achieve and I can do it, and I have mastered this. And experimentation. So I'm going to play you another video here, and keep those particular learning dispositions in mind as you watch it, and maybe write a few notes or share on the chat. What are you seeing? What learning processes are you seeing with this little boy as he engages in heuristic play? There is a bit of narrative over the top. You can just ignore that, or you can listen along as well.
Here we have George at 7.5 months exploring his treasure basket. As you can see, he's just enjoying banging the objects, hearing them make sounds, moving things around to get to his favourite item actually at the moment, which his mum says is the coaster. Using his senses to discover the coaster, using his mouth to taste it, his hands to feel it. Trying to reach down into the basket to pull something out from the bottom. And again, he puts it straight into his mouth to discover what it feels like. Moving the objects around is a great experience. He gets to feel how they feel. If they make a noise as he hits them together. That's a
Okay. So hopefully you wrote down a few little notes about that. But, you know, again, I would encourage you, try this out. Try it out in your centers, in your settings, and see what happens. You sometimes have to do it over a period of time, especially if you haven't engaged in this type of learning experience with your children before. You may need to do it over a period of time. It's also a good thing to do if the infant, for example, is awake when the others are having a little rest time. It can be their own special time, and have a treasure basket there that you don't put new things into all the time. Keep it stable, keep it very similar, keep it the same, so that the child learns what they want to play with. You would have heard the narrative saying, oh, his favorite thing at the moment is this coaster. He's always looking for this coaster. There's the learning processes in action. So some important principles to think about when making discoveries. Again, putting yourself in the mind of the child. What can I do with this? And remembering that all objects have possibilities and potentials. So many objects that you have in your home have potentials for exploratory play with infants and toddlers. And the objects don't come with a definition. A whisk is not a whisk to a child, to an infant. A saucepan is not a saucepan to an infant. A saucepan has numerous things that you can do with it. And so do whisks and wooden spoons and so on. Have faith in the child's innate learning dispositions, and those learning processes will come to the fore. So think about open-ended materials, flexible combinations, be creative, be inventive, look at what you have and think about how you could present these to the infants in your care. The last thing, though, that I want to deal with before I finish today is that exploratory play does not mean solitary play. And so I'm challenging you to put yourself now in this learning equation. I focus very strongly on the infant at the moment, but now I want you to put yourself into the picture. And why do I want to do that? We can go back to the early years learning framework, because the early years learning framework very clearly states, and they are absolutely spot on with this, that educators who engage in intentional teaching recognize that learning occurs in social contexts, and interactions and conversations are vitally important for learning. So interactions and conversations are not just a social aspect of the child's world, they are vitally important for learning, because learning is regarded as being co-constructed through interactions. So in other words, the infant does bring these fundamental learning processes, thinking dispositions, to any learning situation. But you, as an educator, can help through your interactions, help them to construct that learning. So learning is a co-constructed, it's a collaborative effort. And language, therefore, is the key to learning. And I want to just spend the last 5 or so minutes of this talk talking about the power of language, the power of the talk that the child experiences and that they gradually learn to use. So why is language so powerful? What is really interesting is that early language, the language that the child develops before the age of 3, even before the age of 2, their capabilities links to their capabilities in preschool and also in school and beyond. Language, their capabilities to use language, to be a speaker and a listener and a conversationalist, predicts their capabilities, not only in language in the later years, but also in literacy. It's a foundation for literacy, and also in cognition, in thinking, in knowing. So why is it so important? Because through the language that the child learns and gradually learns to speak, they're able then to share their ideas, to share with you what they know. And that helps them, again, to engage in these interactions that are learning interactions, learning, constructing interactions. But they don't do that, as I said, they don't do it alone. A language-rich environment is absolutely essential for this. Children need to hear language, a lot of it. They need to hear talk. They need to be encouraged to talk and to use their developing communication skills, whether those early communication skills are gestures or expressions or just moving. When you talk to a baby and you pause and you wait and they move in response to what you've said. We need to encourage that to and fro, what has been referred to as serve and return, but that's a topic for another day. We also need to engage children in these conversations and have rich talk as well. So what do I mean when I talk about a language-rich environment? To start off with, a language-rich environment enables us to bring that talking and the thinking together. And so through play, there are many, many opportunities for you to become involved and to talk with these infants and toddlers about what they're doing, what they're experiencing, about what you're doing, what you are experiencing, and the kind of things that they're learning about. And so in other words, it's through these interactions that children, these very young children, become exposed to your ideas and your thinking. And therefore that provides that context in which they will start to also become aware of the words and how to express those words and ideas for themselves. So what do we need to think about with a language-rich environment? We need to think about the words and the phrases that we use. And now with very young children, we do tend to speak a little bit more slowly, use shorter sentences, repeat things more often. And often we use that sing-song voice because, which used to be called motherese, it's now called infant-directed speech, but it's that sing-song. Hi, how are you today? Are you having a nice day? That sing-song. But if you notice, what I also did when I showed you that was that I paused. And that is really important because that gives the child that chance to respond. But the words and the phrases that we use are really important. And what is important, we often think we need to use simple words with infants and toddlers, not use interesting, complicated words. That is actually a fallacy. Children who are exposed to more words, not only in quantity, but also in quality, as in diverse words to describe things, descriptive words, interesting verbs, interesting nouns and adjectives, all of those things. Those children actually develop language better than children who are only experiencing a narrow range of words. So keep it rich. Keep your language with these infants and toddlers rich. Think about the function. Quite often what I hear with people talking to infants and toddlers is what I call a whole lot of management talk. Management talk is telling children what to do, what not to do, regulating their behavior, talking to them about what they want, what they need. Now, of course, we have to do that. We have to get stuff done. But also talk to infants and toddlers about things, about their play. Give them information about things. That information-rich talk is not only fundamental for language development, but it also is fundamental for their learning as well. We have to go beyond simply the management talk. I've already talked about responsiveness. You responding to the child when they initiate with you, and also the child then giving that child, inviting a response back. Because when we get that, we get conversations, even with very little children, even with very young infants. We have seen the way in which these infants are able to engage in to and fro conversations or proto-conversations, like conversations, because they make noises, they make bodily movements, and so on. But encouraging those conversations is really, really important. So I think I'm nearly out of time. So I'm just going to go through these slides quite quickly. So what do you want to talk about? And sometimes it is actually really difficult, especially with pre-verbal infants, knowing what to talk about, because you're doing a lot of the work here. You have to make inferences about what it is they're doing, what it is they're thinking, what it is they're intending to do, and so on. But keeping it relevant, getting involved in their play, and just talking about what they are doing, almost like a narrative, giving them a narrative about what they're doing, what you're doing. It helps you to find interesting things to talk about. And also, the other thing is an interesting environment. So interesting play experiences or routine experiences gives you hundreds of things to talk about. If your environment, your learning environment is not very interesting, it's hard to find new things to think about. So create that interesting and varied environment. And remember that all events are language learning opportunities. Quite often, the only time you might get to have one-on-one conversations with very young children is, for example, when you're changing their nappies. So have that conversation, sing that song, talk to them about what you're doing and what they're doing whilst you're changing their nappy. So remembering, and meal times as well, are fantastic times to sit down and just simply have a chat with very young children and talk to them, not just about the management stuff, do you want more bananas, but also talk to them about what they did today or what other children are doing at that particular point in time, and use it for a chatting time. So these very final points. Communication is important, not correctness. So these authentic communications that you have with children will provide that climate where children feel comfortable to use their developing language skills to you, and worry about what's being communicated and not the correctness of the communication. If you continue to correct children, or if you laugh at them when they say something, that they say it in a slightly, a different way, not an adult way of saying it, if you laugh at them, it will shut them down. They will stop wanting to communicate with you. You have to be open to those communications. So when they say something where the grammar is not quite right or the pronunciation is not right, correct it, model it back to the children. Just echo it back and then take the conversation further. And talk to infants and toddlers as if they understand. As I've said, they have incredibly capable minds, and we're actually finding out that they understand an awful lot more than we even realized that they understood 5 or 10 years ago. They do understand a lot, so talk to them as if they understand, and then that helps you to provide these rich experiences, language experiences for the children. So talk with infants. And here's a model that you can start to use in your practice whilst the infants are playing and learning in your setting. Observe them first. That'll give you ideas of what to talk about. So determine their interests and tune in. Then talk to them. Describe and comment and invite the response. Say something and pause. That inviting gesture, that inviting look, using a simple question will invite a response. Wait for the response, and then when you get the response, follow up with something else, say something else, and encourage that. Try, there's an expression that says strive for 5. Try to get 5 conversational turns at least, and then you will be creating a learning experience. So follow up and encourage, and then extend, add more details, add another idea. And then of course, it goes back to the beginning. Keep watching, keep documenting, keep thinking, and keep responding. So going back to our first slide, thinking about these infants now. Hopefully, I've given you at least something in this talk today that enables you to really realize that these children are competent, capable, and resourceful learners. And I just want to finish off because sometimes I'm told, well, I don't know where to start. Where can I start? What can I do to make a change in my program, in my curriculum that I offer these children, so that I can take learning further. And this looks a little bit like a shameless plug, but this only got published yesterday. And I wrote this along with a colleague, Belinda Davis. And it's one of the early Childhood Australia learning booklets. And we wanted to present some case studies that were presented to us some years ago in an infant toddler conference that we run at Macquarie University. And these were case studies where infant toddler educators made very simple changes, and they documented not only the children's learning, but their own learning and their own processes of change. And so I'm just putting it out there that you might want to have a look at that. So I'm going to stop now. Thank you all so very much for listening. I hope this has been valuable for you. If you want to contact me, my contact number is there, and I'm sure you're going to have a fabulous rest of the conference. And I think I've pretty much gone to time.
Thank you so much, Sheila. That was absolutely fantastic, and everyone's giving great feedback. They really enjoyed your session this morning. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I will stop sharing and hand back over to you, Elizabeth, then.
Thank you.